I'd like to briefly discuss today some thoughts on crane inspections. There's a lot of questions that come up about when a crane has to be inspected, what part of a crane has to be inspected, and who does these inspections. First, any crane that is being used in construction type work must be inspected essentially shift. Every shift it has to be inspected. That means every shift it's used, it's supposed to be looked over. This is normally done by the operator. There also has to be a monthly inspection done on these cranes. The monthly inspection is also normally done by the crane operator. Now, the difference between the shift inspection and the monthly inspection is simply the monthly inspection by federal law must be a documented inspection. That means you would use a checklist type form to document your inspection. You'd put the make, model, serial number of the crane, go through the checklist, and the person inspecting the crane would sign and put their name at the bottom. The shift inspection on a crane, on the other hand, doesn't legally need to be documented, although it is probably a good idea to do that. Here at Stephenson Equipment, we offer inspection booklets that were put together for crane owners and crane operators to comply with federal OSHA regulation for shift and monthly inspection documentation. They're available through all of our parts departments. Now, the next inspection that's required is the annual comprehensive inspection. The annual inspection is different from the shift and monthly inspection to the point that a person has to be, quote, qualified to do the annual inspection. This person would normally be someone who has extensive knowledge in this type of crane, has had training in inspections, has knowledge and has been trained on the regulations, and more than likely has an inspector certification. The annual inspection is considered to be comprehensive. That means it's done when the crane is not being operated. It is components that are looked over are all the crane components that have to do with lifting operations. Now, that's somewhat confusing because you say, okay, well, what parts of the crane are actually involved in lifting? If you think of anything that's being loaded, outriggers, frame, upper of the crane, superstructure, boom, wire rope, all of them components, along with the operational characteristics of the crane, are inspected during the annual inspection. So that essentially is, in the nutshell, what the crane inspections required. Now, the question that comes up many times is, well, what about the carrier or the truck part of a crane that can be driven on the highway? Is this part of the crane also required to be inspected? The simple answer is yes, although it does get a little bit more complicated than that. Federal law requires all cranes to be inspected that are doing construction work. That would be the inspections I just spoke about. Federal law also requires the carrier or truck part of all commercial vehicles to be inspected every day they're used and also annually. This inspection is regulated by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Association, or FMCSA. The FMCSA simply says the truck portion, which would be a walk-around type inspection, lights, tires, safety devices, brakes, and so forth, the normal things that you would look at prior to taking a vehicle on the highway, must be inspected every day. This is done usually by the driver before they take the crane on the highway, and it is a checklist type form and must be documented. The annual comprehensive inspection on the carrier portion must also be a documented inspection and must be completed by a qualified mechanic who is familiar with that type of crane. Now, this can be a commercial vehicle inspection mechanic, or it can be just an experienced mechanic familiar with that type of machine. This inspection is separate from the crane inspection. It must be documented separately. It must have its own decal put on the carrier, and the requirements for this inspection are separate from the crane inspection. So essentially what you got is two different inspections on these types of cranes. Any crane that can be driven on the highway must have the crane components inspected by a qualified crane inspector. The carrier components must be inspected by a qualified carrier crane inspector. Sounds confusing, but it is separate and they must both be done. I hope this helps. Thank you.